Yo everybody, what's going on? This is Keegan from Kman Reviews bringing you the next episode of Review Recall. This will cover as many albums I could listen to in October. Much like September, October was pretty full, so I'm sure this is going to be a long video. So let's not waste any more time, let's just dive in. You know, I saw a lot of insane hype for this record. Even if Vaporwave isn't typically the first genre I go running to, I was still very intrigued to see what this is all about. And I think that hype is pretty justified. Insanely rich, layered production, a lot of dreamy, ethereal moments, but also more abrasive parts too. Definitely feels more like one thorough journey rather than individual highlights for me, but this did have some fantastic highs. Really love this. Ooh, damn, this album hits. It's got some bouncy yet occasionally smooth or rough and gritty beats. All of the features here kill it. They all stand out while Nonazz is the effervescent host of the whole show. Had a great time with this. Check it out. What a weird yet strangely refreshing pop album. Apparently Todd collected unfinished and forgotten demos from other artists and tried to repurpose them. It does make for some clunkers, but there are also some entrancing experiments on here. Probably won't be for everybody, but I don't think it's too bad. It's a very solid listen here. Fev sounds a bit more raw on this one than on previous outings. Not a mind-blowing hip-hop album at all, but certainly still a good time. Stray Kids have been absolutely tearing up 2022 for me, with me loving pretty much all of their projects. Ordinary was great, the Circus EP was a fun listen, and MAXIDENT here is another amazing addition to that streak. I especially like the subunit cuts on this one near the back end, with each member getting to shine a lot more. Pretty fun collection of tracks. It's pretty much just as boring as that cover. The best thing I can say about this is that the Baroque chamber pop style here is pretty sweet. The production kind of carries this one with relaxing acoustic and luscious string work. But if you're looking for an exciting record, this sure as hell ain't it. Very rich and detailed hip-hop record. If you're looking for something to really sink your teeth into and feel something new with each consecutive visit, maybe give this a shot. I think the main question for this new Red Hot Chili Peppers album here is it better than the first Chili Peppers release this year? And that's a toss-up. I would personally think so, but not by too much. Either way, there's no denying the band has had a fantastic run this year, with both albums being really long and seemingly bloated, but neither actually felt that way. It's yet another great khorti project here, some fun electronic experimental ambient stuff, very captivating as well since it changes in tone quite frequently. Plenty of surprises as well, like the extremely bass-heavy trap beat later on in VR Space or the gritty distortion of Dark Spells, but I think that just makes for a fun listen. Wouldn't say it's their best this year, but I still had a blast with it. Give it a listen if you're curious. If there's anything to be taken away from this, it's that Baby Tate is definitely a talented rapper. A lot of charisma, eclectic taste as well. I just don't think it pans out enough to make a fully memorable project as all. Specifically around the midway point is when the tracks start to get a bit forgettable. However, I don't think this project should be ignored as there's a lot of potential on display here. Give this a listen. This album had me very intrigued, mostly because this seems to be some of the most well-received material for the band ever, so I had a good bit of hype going into this, and, it's good. I'd argue it's one of their best albums, personally. Still not gonna be a highlight, really, for me for this year, but it's good. This project is mostly carried by LeAnn's evergreen vocals that are still absolutely stunning over a lot of these more sentimental ballads, but frankly a bulk of the actual song structure here is pretty forgettable at the end of the day, but at least it sounds great. Now, I'm by no means the most reputable source when it comes to the Arctic Monkeys takes, but I did enjoy this album a good bit. Certainly not the rock album I was expecting, but followed a pleasant chamber pop style with well-textured production and an all-around smooth, warm, and heartening listen. No, it's definitely you, bro. Please start making more interesting music. An all-around solid dose of power pop and pop rock, gritty, crunchy riffs and catchy melodies make most of this track list pretty memorable. It's not going to be a frontrunner for Album of the Year at all, but if you want some fun, carefree power pop, check it out. way too long, generic, standard, and just begins to feel like a chore after 45 minutes. I guess solid enough if you enjoy his sound, but I'd much rather take his album from last year over this. So this is the debut solo project of Mariana's Trench bassist MIKEH, and I was extremely intrigued to hear what he had under his belt, and it's pretty good. Certainly got nothing on Josh's level of creative showmanship, but this is some quaint alt pop that surprises but satisfies. Quite the left turn of a record for Chloe here, changing from the indie pop rock of her last album, Blood Bunny, now to the hyper pop, shameless Charlie XCX pastiche on this one here. And I don't think this style suits her the best, to be honest. The beats are fun, abrasive, and colorful, but the lyricism here leaves a lot to be desired and just feels more like a forced commercial pivot than a genuine artistic expression. Really enjoy the more mellow, kind of jazz-inspired beats here. Fits pretty well with the vintage-style album cover. It's a decent 23-minute project. It's good. Check it out. This ambient EP didn't really do too much for me. It was kind of just fine, but that could just speak to my general indifference with ambient as a whole. Damn, this album is fantastic. Boldy James is very smooth, very collected and confident over what is probably Nicholas Craven's best production job this year. With this album, you truly get the best of both worlds. I see why it's being loved, and I'm in the same boat. Excellent stuff. It is a pleasant fusion of indie rock, indie pop with some shoegaze elements, but I gotta be honest, Alvvays have never truly given me an album that justifies their insane hype in the critic sphere. This is probably one of their better albums though, but honestly I still wouldn't call it amazing. Ooh, bizarre album here. I typically like my cloud rap tracks to have a bit more of a nourished and developed sound with some extra bass, and Cartier God rarely delivers that on the album. The beats are all very brittle and thin, with the exception of I Can't Look in the Mirror probably being the best track here. I totally get the featheriness of his sound, so it's just more of a personal taste thing I suppose, but what I really don't like about this is the prolonged silences across these tracks. It feels like empty spaces to make all these tracks conveniently the same length. As a whole though, Cartier's released better this year. I'm gonna stick with those. Oh god, I missed Andy Black's vocals. So damn gripping over the melodic metal/metalcore here. I'll never get why this band gets clowned on. I have a soft spot for them. For an album so firmly rooted in this future bass, hyperpop scene and being less than 30 minutes, it's a surprisingly uninteresting, disjointed, and frankly boring listen. There are a few tracks here that I think are good. That slow tie feature on Up All Week was pretty nice, and the back end is home to some solid gems, but that's really all there is. Great R&B release here. Babyface acts more like backup singer here, letting the talented female vocalists, hence the title, really show their stripes and vocal chops, and it's a pretty fun listen. So King Gizzard managed to pull off 3 albums in the course of a month. So let's just start with the first being Ice, Death, Planets, Lungs, Mushrooms, and Lava, which is pretty good. I like the obvious 70s psychedelic influence, feels like a fun jam band style album. Probably my favorite of the 3. Laminated Denim follows a similar formula and doesn't hit as hard in its 2 15-minute long tracks. Very competent musically, but not as potent as the first record. And Changes kind of follows suit, being the weakest in the trilogy, leaning into a bit more psychedelic pop. Still a good listen, but honestly doesn't leave a standout track aside from the 13-minute opener. All things considered though, a successful Giz trilogy. I never checked out Let the Sun Talk back in 2019, so this was my first listen to Mavi, though I did see a few people say this was a downgrade, so I wasn't too sure what to expect. After listening though, I gotta say, despite having this abstract vibe to it, it's pretty accessible and clean. That's not necessarily a negative since I do think it has great flow between tracks, good performances all around. It does have some boring moments, but I do think as a whole it is a good listen. Pretty smooth, slightly rough indie rock, almost pub rock here. Pedi's vocals provide just enough roughness to prevent this from being completely sterile. All around decent time. If you're looking for anything in that scene at all, give this a listen. Not for me. Very solid hip-hop record here, but I can't help but feel like this album is way longer than it indicates. The opening leg felt very slow compared to the rest, but regardless of that, it's still a great listen and deserves to be talked about more. If you're looking for some clean, respectable, and sharp pop music, this should be top of your list. Great songwriting chops as well, once again proving her authenticity. Yeah, I enjoyed this. Another very nice underground hip-hop album here. A lot of texture, dense verses, and Skip's production and more experimental beats really help Know-It-All's more no bullshit style charisma. While I do think Dropkick Murphys excel more with the raucous, high-energy stylings of more punk-focused instrumentals, this acoustic one has its charm to it. This has massive sing-along pub vibes to it, which is a style that is so damn uplifting to me, I can't hate it if I tried. Not up to the caliber of their album from last year, but this was a pleasant listen. Pretty full with dense bass and synth-heavy beats. If you enjoy artists like Playboi Carti, maybe Lil Uzi or Drain Gang as well, this is the beat tape for you. Subtle, subdued, kind of electronic music here from the System of a Down frontman. Certainly not what you'd expect given the man in question, but if you need to see just how damn dynamic he can be, might want to try this out. But just don't go into it thinking you're going to get some chop suey-like bangers. Yeah, it's your typical Division album. Solid enough background noise for R&B, but doesn't have enough substance to truly stand out as a fantastic album this year. Yeah, this is certainly not up to the confident quality that Voice Notes was 4 years ago, but it is your run-of-the-mill pop album, meaning, yeah, I did enjoy this a good bit. However, I know a lot of people don't typically like that more manufactured sound. If you're in that crowd, you're better off avoiding this. You know, all things considered, it's better than Volume 1, but man, this still felt like uninspired, incohesive drivel. At least Big Snoop Has That Fire is a pretty good highlight, but that's all I can really take away from this. Easily better than the first Trip tape, and also probably up there with the band's best work. It all flows together very well. Clemens sounds fantastic. Just another reason I love this band so dearly. It's not Gunn's best project. I wouldn't even say it's his best this year, but this does feel like an appropriate send-off to this long-running mixtape series by bringing in pretty much everyone under the sun to work with. Some stand out more than others, but all in all, it makes for a fun time. This is without a doubt one of the band's better efforts of their later years. Feels complex, cohesive, and catchy, even over the hour-plus runtime capped off with a pretty stellar Billy Idol cover. Really enjoyed this one. Latest MIA album here, and this was a decently enjoyable listen. Felt like a bit of a back-to-basics return with pretty solid production, but that's about it. The performances across this were drastically hit or miss, and just didn't feel like all of the care in the world went into it. I don't think this was worth 6 years of a wait. A pleasant return from Julian after what I believe is 11 years, and it sounds great. Vocals are fantastic over these simple pop-rock singer-songwriter instrumentals. Not really much else to say, but it's pretty good. Okay, ignoring the elephant in the room for a moment, damn, this was good. The duo sound rejuvenated and exciting and charismatic, fun flows, punchy beats. I'll admit the energy and spark begins to die down near the end of this almost hour-long project, but for a Migos-related project after the drought of mediocrity that was the later two Culture albums, it's just reassuring to know there was still fire there. Rest in peace, Takeoff, though. Probably one of the hardest I've been hit by an artist's untimely passing in a while. Olivia has a bit of a twang to her voice, so her singing these low-key poppy tunes almost gives the EP a bit of a country vibe, which doesn't always click with me, but still not a bad listen. Yeah, I'll be honest, this other Mac album didn't do too much for me, but I think the main reason why was because of the production. It feels so barren, uninspired, and bland. Hami tries his best to save it with some good flows, but it's just a whatever album at the end of the day. While it's not my favorite pop listen this year, there's no denying Carly has a strong knack for catchy melodies and a gripping retro-infused style. Great listen. Yeah, I was tapped out with this one around track 5. Kodak just does not click with me. He's had a few moments of greatness throughout his career, like the album he released earlier this year was probably one of the better ones. This wasn't. This is a 90-minute live jazz fusion record, so I was a bit worried, but damn, this is crisp, breezy, a lovely listen. I do think the fun started to die down a little bit near the end, but if you can listen to this and not crack a smile, you're tougher than I am. Despite this not necessarily being a boring rap album, it sure gave me nothing to talk about. OT's got decently gruff charisma, and probably the star of the record, as these beats and features don't really help that much, especially the features. The only memorable one was Chris Webby, but that's only because his voice is recognizable. Yeah, you'd be better off skipping this one. Way too long for the genre. Became stale and boring pretty quickly. It's a generic take on indie/bedroom pop. If you're really into that sound, honestly, maybe avoid this. There's not too much of note for you here. Man, the production on this record is top notch. Plus the MCs on here are pretty damn good. The title is accurate because he struck gold on this one. Excellent stuff. I like this EP here a good bit, even if I think the last two tracks were a bit on the dry side, but I like the more hardcore elements on display here, and it makes for a solid detour in her sound. Can't wait to see where that goes next. Smino really highlights his versatility on this record, which really lightens the blow of this 50-minute runtime. All-around enjoyable blend of R&B, some neo-soul, and rap. There's not really much else to say. It is a good listen. Check it out. Damn, Randy Blythe still sounds awesome, even after the 20-plus year stint of him being the lead vocalist for this band. He really shines on this record. In fact, I'd say most of the band do. There are a few tracks on here that I think are a bit bland and generic, but this is probably one of the band's best albums in a while. I had a good time with this. So this is a compilation of Benny the Butcher's Black Soprano label and their debut full-length commercial album, and as you'd expect, it's pretty great. Fantastic production, very well picked and utilized features. It all feels so smooth and fluid. Yeah, this is an amazing album. To say the least, underwhelming. You know, it's Lil Mosey being Lil Mosey, but let's ask the real question. How many of you knew this came out? I think Jack Antonoff cared more about this album than Taylor did. Young Gravy's certainly gotten better, in particular with how tight his rapping and flow is. The production is still pretty sweet too, and man, this guy has some of the most infectiously silly and carefree charisma I've heard in a long time. Such a fun listen. Very solid folk rock Americana record here. I do think it could have been cut around the back end since it doesn't leave too much memorable, but for what it is, it's a solid way to spend an hour. It's pretty much a mini posse cut project with some of the most well-known in this underground cloud rap scene. There have been better in the genre this year in my opinion, but 2 or 3 bangers help save it from falling into obscurity. You know, it's not bad, but from the trace experience I have with the Pixies, this does not hold a candle to any of their earlier work. It's a mostly unremarkable listen, with the only noticeable saving grace being good instrumentals. The vocals do nothing for me, the lyrics are not the best. I don't know, maybe I just need to understand the Pixies better. I do see a fair amount of love for this record, but as of right now, this did not click too much. Okay, I think I'm officially burned out of Young Boy's sound, or the guys just dropped too many albums too quickly that the quality's just tanked. I'm gonna go with both. I went into this expecting the same level of emotional potency that was on the first Actual Life project, but nope, this sounds like royalty-free music. Decent enough, but does not hold a candle to my expectations. Oh, hell yes. This is pretty great. Love the alt-metal, post-grunge style of this record, and the vocalist sounds fantastic. I'm not insanely familiar with Bush, but this album kind of makes me feel like I need to change that. Great album here. Man, the versatility on display here is truly something special. A great mix of hearty bangers, more melodic moments, no outright duds. What's not to love? Check this out. I'd say it's an improvement over Volume 1. The songs are better, had more catchy vibes overall, but I don't know. I think I'm past the phase in my life where I would have truly enjoyed listening to this. T Grizzly, an already established guilty pleasure of mine, releasing an album that is entirely visual story driven, multiple part suites, with detailed lyricism, catchy flows, and the occasional bit of crass humor. Sign me up. I'm very happy this album has the presents listing on it, as this truly feels like a stage performance or a show. Huge cast of features, really helping to highlight Ashley's impeccable knack for character-driven songs. In some instances, she's hardly in the tracks themselves, as they present a warm, comfortable twang and honky-tonk. Such a different country album than you'd expect. If you're looking for something more engaging in the modern genre, maybe give this a listen. An all-around solid project here. I do think the features, while scattered, really steal the show. Some of the beats weren't quite my cup of tea and kind of dragged the pacing a bit, and especially being 22 tracks, some just kind of fell to the wayside, unfortunately, but still a decent enough listen. It's a solid enough album, kind of has that gothic timbre to it with very good vocals, but didn't really have any standout tracks and was just a decent listen. I don't have too much else to add to that. Okay, so I listened to this at like 4 in the morning when I was having trouble trying to sleep, and I gotta say, at that moment, this was a very comforting listen. I don't think I would have had as pleasant an experience with this had I been fully awake, so I'll take it. Latest EP from this local rock band, and I enjoyed it. Great energy, great vocals too, just a brief 10 minutes. If you're curious, highly recommend. Wow, okay, so I'm usually a fan of the more manufactured, typical pop music you'd hear on cookie-cutter radio stations. This is one of the most soulless pop listens I've heard this year. Bland production, boring performances, yeah, this was pretty bad. Look, I get why people hate this, and to an extent, I don't care for it as much as well. There were a few boring moments that really dragged, but I don't know, this kind of gave me like a Bring Me the Horizon vibe, and with me loving their last project so much, I don't know, I didn't hate this. Maybe if I was more familiar with the more loved Architects records, I'd probably be disappointed, but I can't say that. It was decent. I 100% get why people aren't listening to this guy anymore. However, I just want to come on here and say this is probably his best project to date. It doesn't do anything revolutionary for his sound at all, so of course it's not anywhere near Album of the Year contender. However, if for whatever reason you're looking for more music from him in 2022, maybe check this out in all its 75-minute glory. It's a solid indie rock record with good melodies, but honestly this didn't give me much to write home about. You know, I've been warming up to Lil Baby over the past year and a bit. This album kind of shot that down without hesitation. Quite the stylistic detour for Tegan and Sarah, this time diving way more into synth and dance pop than their usual indie pop. I absolutely get why people wouldn't care for this, but pop works for me, and so did this. Stu Bangus's production has been doing wonders for me this year, and hearing RJ spit his signature delivery over varying styles like boom bap, orchestral, jazzy, and the tried and true drumless beat, it's a very engaging listen, and just being barely under half an hour might just be what you're looking for. Check it out. Yeah, it's a solid indie folk, indie pop record, arguably better than a lot of them with some nice hits like Runner or Blessing or No Bitterness. I'm still not entirely sure why critics are raving about this specifically, but I can't deny it's a good album. Damn, Jin's got some fire to him. Love the more spacious, jazzy beats with a rougher flavor in his delivery. Great EP here. One of the most underrated singers today now sticks to more depressive melancholia over bare piano and acoustics. Very comforting listen for me. Haven't heard too much from this Canadian noise rock outfit, but I can safely say this was pretty solid. Had some explosive moments while also remaining in a lumbering sinisterness, especially for the back end. Pretty solid. To the shock of absolutely no one, Sloan returned with another album chock full of indie rock and power pop earworms. Even being over 30 years together, they still know how to make bangers. Great record. Open Mike Eagle doing what Open Mike Eagle does best, spitting unique, captivating, and quirky bars with his signature smoky voice. I don't think it's up to the same level of quality as his previous two records in particular, but this was still a great listen outside of those. Definitely is an improvement to her last album, which is nice, good production, solid vocals, immersive listen, not enough for me to fully fall in love with it, but all in all a welcome upgrade. You know, it's pretty alright. I think the vibe of the tracklist is a bit too slow to complement DJ Drama's insistent hype man presence across it, but Jeezy does well enough with what he does, so I can't complain too much. Alrighty, folks, that'll do it for yet another very long episode of Review Recall. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Make sure you follow me on all my social media links, and come join the Discord server as well. All the links will be in the description below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.